The core of transhumanism is the idea of using reason, science, and technology backed by goodwill to overcome fundamental human limits, to live longer than we've ever lived, to become smarter, to become emotionally better than we've ever been. That is the core of it. All the other things are details. The particular technologies are not the essence of it. Maybe we'll use nanotechnology, maybe we'll use some other method, maybe we'll use biotechnology. So it's good to have arguments about which technology is most effective and most promising, but that's not the core of what defines transhumanism. It's defined by its values of progress and reason and optimism and not challenging limits, and by using, pursuing that relentlessly. That's really what transhumanism is, essentially. One of the most attractive things about transhumanism, I think, is it's a very thoroughgoing philosophy of improvement. It's about self-improvement, it's about improving society, about improving the economy, about improving all our possibilities. So it's fundamentally a very progressive philosophy. It's very popular, especially among young people, to make a big deal of being an anti-racist and anti-sexist. Transhumanists find that a little bit of a yawner because, of course, that's very obvious. If we're talking about making radical alterations to ourselves, then differences in skin color and gender seem pretty trivial by comparison. So it's attractive because it really overcomes those rather artificial distinctions and looks well beyond them to what can we individually and as a species do to vastly improve our condition. So it has a real visionary component. It's not just about what are the problems of today and tomorrow and even the next 5 years. It looks far beyond that. So that has to be attractive. It's bringing back a vision into society that's been lacking for some time. I think we've become so focused on short-term problems and complaining about how things are that we've lost a lot of that vision. In the Enlightenment, that was a thing. They came out of the Dark Ages when nothing much good had happened for 1,000 years. And so it was a very exciting view that, with scientific method, we can actually improve life. And that's gotten a little bit forgotten in recent years. So transhumanism, I think, offers a new, positive, but science and reality-based way of approaching an improved human future. I think the idea that technology causes dehumanization is actually the reverse of the truth. Now, certainly some technologies can be abused. I think people who lock themselves in front of a screen and play the same video game for 18 hours every day, that may be dehumanizing them because it's narrowing them down. It's narrowing their relationships, they don't interact with other people, and they don't have a wide range of activities. So you can abuse it. But in general, it seems to me that if you're at the mercy of nature, if you're stuck in one particular environment, you can't meet anybody else, you become very insular in your tribe, and everybody else is seen as an enemy, you become very narrow in your thinking. The long run of technological progress and of economic development means that we can afford to be generous. We can afford to treat people outside our immediate tribe as part of the same community. The level of violence has declined, as a number of recent books have been arguing. If you look at the actual trends, violence has massively declined over the last few centuries as we become wealthier and smarter and more civilized. So yes, somehow it's always the very latest technology that's dehumanizing. So I think, in another 50 years, people will look at genetic engineering and, oh no, that's fine, but there'll be some other technology that's dehumanizing. So it's really a matter of the unfamiliarity combined with the unfortunate tendency of science fiction, especially in movies, to always portray dystopias, these dehumanized futures, just because that's lazy and easy to portray. It's much harder to portray a future where technology has mostly beneficial effects. There are a certain number of objections that come up frequently, especially when we talk about life extension. There are typical ones about what about overpopulation, what about resources, won't I become bored? Won't dictators stay on for millions of years ruling their countries? Other people complain that it's somehow unnatural, even though human nature has always been about modifying ourselves and changing ourselves. So there's certain standard objections come up, and to me they're all based on a combination of fear and lack of imagination. Essentially what people usually do when they think about these distant scenarios, they tend to project how we are today into the future. So for one thing, you talk about life extension. Bizarrely, they automatically think that we're talking about living older and getting older and older and more decrepit. And of course you would want to live like that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about living youthfully and vigorously, in fact, better than we've ever been. Or they project other things remaining the same, not having any different technology, no better means of dealing with the environment. But the fact is that we've had environmental crises throughout human history. Back in the early Industrial Revolution, the British were burning all the forests for wood. But does that mean there are no trees left on the planet now? No. Because we go through cycles, we learn new technologies, new ways of producing energy, and the same way we will respond to those challenges. So I think what transhumanists are pretty good at is thinking along multiple tracks. They can think about multiple changes at a time, not just one single change. That's not the way the world works. So almost all these objections are based on this false idea that one thing will change and nothing else will. Or they just can't imagine other possibilities. They can't imagine new technologies changing the rules, as they have always done and will continue to do so. Our brains evolved to make very short-term decisions. I'm facing a tiger, should I run this way or that way? Or should I duck down or run up a tree? They didn't have agriculture even, so they didn't even have to think really a year ahead. You looked about the next chase and finding a warm cave. So it was very, very short-term thinking, and that was how you survived. We now live in a very complex technological society with lots of interdependencies, and we live a lot longer than we did, and we can expect that to continue. So the brain is just fundamentally not well suited to long-term thinking, which is why I think we won't have fundamental solutions to these problems until we change the human constitution itself. On top of that, of course, you have all kinds of institutional imperatives. You have people who need to make short-term profits to satisfy their shareholders, and that tends to make us think short-term. You have politicians who want to get re-elected in 2 or 3 or 4 years, and so they think about maximizing the benefits that they apparently produce in those few years, and it doesn't matter what the long-term consequences are. So they may be quite willing to hand out lots of money to people, not thinking about the long-term debt they're producing. So these are some of the, I think, several factors that lead us to short-term thinking. So transhumanists are somewhat unique in really stretching out that thinking horizon. How can we think several decades or even centuries ahead? And that takes a lot of mental energy to do, because you don't really know how things are going to work out. You can only look at general trajectories and trends. But by imagining those possibilities, of course, you create those possibilities. If you never think about the long term, you'll never really head in that direction. You'll just be bumped around by the current forces.